Good afternoon. I'm Hannah Riley Bowles. I have the honor of co-directing our Women in Public Policy program here at the Harvard Kennedy School with Professor Iris Bonet. This is our fall Women in Public Policy program research seminar focused on exploring work and family. So during this fall, we are exploring research related to managing the boundaries of work and family, illuminating how individual agency, institutions, policies and social norms shape our ability to thrive in both of these realms. And today, we are pleased to welcome Professor Richard Petz, presenting on how work and family policies can promote greater father involvement. And if you have been with us through earlier sessions in the seminar, you will know that this is a perfect time for Professor Petz to be entering the discussion, because we've been really excited to turn our attention to the question of working fathers. So in this seminar, Professor Petz will discuss why fathers continue to perform less housework, childcare, and cognitive labor than mothers. His talk will examine how workplace norms and inadequate work-family policies limit fathers' ability to be fully engaged dads at home. So he will present for about 50 minutes. If you have a clarifying question, you can pop it in the chat and we'll see if we can work it in, but we want to give the speaker an opportunity to present, and then we'll open the floor to Q&A. And as usual, please put questions in the chat, please raise your virtual hand, and if you can participate with your camera off or just in full voice, we'll look forward to welcoming you in. Otherwise, we'll make sure to get your question in the chat into the discussion. So please join me in welcoming Richard Petz to contributing to our seminar. Thank you so much, Richard. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Hannah, for having me. Let me get my slides up here. All right. Let me fix this. All right. So thank you, Hannah, for inviting me. Thank you to the Women in Public Policy program at the Harvard Kennedy School for inviting me to present as part of this awesome seminar series focused on work and family. Today, as Hannah mentioned, I'm going to be talking about some of my work that focuses on father involvement and specifically thinking about the ways in which work and workplace policies can both promote as well as hinder efforts to increase father involvement at home. So first, just some very brief background. I don't know that any of this is going to be groundbreaking information for anyone, but just some brief context for why father involvement is important. So there's a pretty sizable literature at this point that clearly illustrates positive consequences associated with greater father involvement. For example, children benefit when they have an involved father, such as through greater cognitive development, fewer behavior problems, and doing better in school. Mothers experience less stress and greater well-being when fathers are more involved. And couples experience more satisfying, stable relationships when fathers are highly engaged at home. In addition, fathers themselves benefit from being more involved in their children's lives in numerous ways. And so many people, myself included, I'm sure people in this virtual room, promote these benefits to encourage fathers to be more involved at home. And as the benefits of father involvement have become more widely acknowledged over time, we see a pretty sharp increase in the percentage of fathers who increasingly say that they want to be more engaged parents and that that's a priority for them. But despite the widespread benefits of father involvement, it's one of those things that actually is good for everybody. And fathers saying they want to be more engaged parents, levels of father involvement, although they've increased slightly over time, they're still generally quite low. When it comes to domestic labor, mothers still shoulder the vast majority of the burden. Specifically, mothers spend about 50% more time on childcare and about 75% more time on housework than fathers. Sort of from my own research, from a longitudinal study that we have, the latest round of data, we find that mothers spend about 1.5 times more time in cognitive labor than fathers. And this cognitive labor is the sort of thinking about, managing, and evaluating what's going on in the household. The disparity between mothers and fathers is even greater when we look at um, those kinds of tasks. Uh, Expectations for father involvement, although we want fathers to be more involved, we don't necessarily expect them to be more involved. And these expectations sort of play out such that fathers are often praised for simply helping out at home, whereas mothers are judged if they do not excel in their expected roles of caregiver and homemaker. So, to achieve greater gender equality, leading scholars have argued for a while that two things need to happen. First, women need to have greater opportunities in the paid labor market, and second, men need to be more involved in domestic labor. As a society, we've made far greater progress in the public sphere than the private sphere, although as Hannah and I were talking about prior to this session starting, we're not there in terms of equality. We've just made more progress in the labor market. And part of the reason for this is prevailing gendered expectations that women should be devoted to family and men should be devoted to work result in the family being a key institution in which gender inequality is reproduced and perpetuated. So if men were as equally involved in childcare, housework, and cognitive labor as women, we would expect the burden of this work on women would be reduced. Society would come to better appreciate the importance of domestic labor, and there would be a more equal playing field in the paid labor market. So with this underlying focus on the importance of increasing father involvement at home and the broader implications for gender equality, I aim to focus on three things in this presentation. First, I'll consider why work continues to act as a barrier to greater father involvement. Second, I'll highlight the importance of favorable work-family policies that include fathers as a way of overcoming some of these barriers. And finally, I'll illustrate some of the positive consequences for families when fathers have access to and actually take advantage of these policies. So turning first to the question of why work remains a key barrier to greater father involvement, we need to recognize this is due in part to the importance we place on work within the United States. The value of hard work is strongly ingrained into American culture, and devoting oneself to work above all else is seen as a badge of honor and a mark of success. And so individuals who adhere to this work-first culture are seen as ideal workers. So ideal workers are those who prioritize work above all else, demonstrate commitment to their employer, are always available to work and willing to work long hours, and who are assumed to not have family obligations that might prevent them from placing work first. These norms have become the standard by which employees are judged, and individuals themselves, workers themselves, often derive their own sense of self-worth based on adherence to these norms. But ideal worker norms pose a problem for father involvement and gender inequality. One cannot be both an intensive parent that is devoted to family and an ideal worker that is devoted to work. And these ideal worker norms intersect with gender norms. So women are assumed to be devoted to their family and thus have to work even harder to demonstrate adherence to ideal worker norms. In contrast, men are assumed to prioritize breadwinning and thus only face high pressures to be an ideal worker. And I use the analogy in thinking about this intersection of ideal worker and gender norms of a scale and trying to balance these things. For mothers, intensive motherhood and ideal worker norms, I argue I say equally strong. They're not quite equally strong, but they're more equal in that most women are employed in paid labor today. So mothers have to constantly try to manage these competing demands. In contrast, the scale is heavily tipped toward ideal worker norms for fathers. So being a fully engaged dad is desired and encouraged, but it's not expected. Whereas adhering to ideal worker norms is seen as obligatory for men. So this imbalance means that the pressure to be an ideal worker and the lack of pressure to be a fully engaged dad leads workplaces to pose particular challenges for father involvement. And so in my interviews with fathers for my book that was published a couple of years ago, the fathers I spoke with all discussed ways in which work prevented them from being as engaged of a father as they wanted to be. Many fathers talked about time at work detracting from time at home. For example, Brandon here worked the most hours of any of the fathers that I interviewed. And he spoke openly about how this limited his ability to be a fully engaged dad. He said, my day typically starts at 3:45 in the morning and I get home at 6:30 at night. I get home and it's like a couple hours before the kids are in bed. So I come home and I try to play with them as hard as I can and do whatever. Try to eat and do bedtime and all that. But I'm afraid I won't be there when they get older and do sports and stuff. I work weekends, I work nights, I work odd hours. Unless something changes, I don't think I'll ever be there like I want to be, but I do the best I can. Other fathers told me about pressures they face to demonstrate devotion to work, even though they prioritized being a fully engaged dad above all else. So Michael was an interesting case here. Michael started his career as an architect, which required very long hours. He left his job prior to having kids for a career in academia to set himself up for better work-life balance. He wanted to be an engaged dad. He recognized that his career as an architect was going to prevent him from being as involved as he wanted to be. So he changed careers. And when he was in graduate school, he became a parent. He had his first child. And he talked about the pressures he faced in regard to ideal worker norms. He said, because most of the grad students were younger, were not married, didn't have families, didn't have family obligations, my thought was, everybody knows I'm married and I have kids, but I don't ever want the kids to become an excuse for why people think I'm not working as hard as them or I'm not doing what I should be doing. I never wanted the kids to be a reason why people were going to say, oh yeah, the reason Michael's not working up to snuff is because he's got those kids at home. I never wanted that to happen. So my attitude in grad school was everybody knows I have kids, but I'm not going to make the kids a problem. Now, Michael's case sounds similar to what you often hear from mothers, that they have to work harder to show that kids are not going to stop them from being an ideal worker. But without the cultural pressures to be fully engaged dads, fathers often feel just as obligated to conform to workplace expectations. This may lead fathers to feel guilty if they're not working enough or are seen as prioritizing family over work. And for example, Jeremy told this story. My friend messaged me the other day and he was like, do you ever work? Because it seems like you are always posting pictures of all the things you're doing with your kids. And that made me feel weird because I'm like, oh my God, am I not working enough? So we see that the importance of ideal worker norms for fathers uniquely pressures fathers to adhere to these norms and even feel guilty if they're not placing work first. So one thing that may enable parents to better balance work and family obligations and desires is access to family-friendly workplace policies, such as workplace flexibility and parental leave. And just as a disclaimer, I'm not making the claim that these are the only two family-friendly workplace policies. We know there are many others, but the bulk of my research is focused on these two policies. And so that's what I'm going to focus on primarily in this talk today. So evidence suggests that these policies can help fathers to be more engaged at home, as I will illustrate throughout this presentation. Unfortunately, most fathers lack access to these policies. So these data you see here are nationally representative data from the American Time Use Survey. These are data prior to the pandemic, so we can take them with a little bit of grain of salt. Respondents were asked whether they can take paid leave from their job for various reasons. And we can see here that just over half of fathers could take paid leave for the birth of a child or to care for a sick family member. And less than half of fathers could take paid leave for childcare reasons that are unrelated to sickness. In addition, in the bottom half of the graph, we see that less than 1/3 of fathers reported ever being able to work from home, and most fathers do not have occasional or frequent flexibility in their work hours. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, that's great. That was pre-pandemic. So much has changed since then. Yes and no. Even if we look at more recent data, we see that although access to these policies has increased, so more states offer paid family leave, companies increased, the percentage of companies who offered paid parental leave increased after COVID or during COVID in the early days, and then sort of went backwards starting in 2021, 2022. So we haven't made as much progress there as perhaps we might think. And even if we look at Remote work. A sizable percentage of fathers are currently not working remotely or in hybrid situations. So these data from our panel study on US parents sort of throughout the duration of the pandemic, you can see from March 2020 to October 2023, the various patterns of remote work that fathers experienced. By the end of 2023, about half of fathers never worked from home. And I already had this nice graph created. We published it, so I didn't update the numbers. But I did check data from our 2024 survey. And if I look at 2024 numbers, 55% of fathers reported not being able to work remotely. So even though we've made some progress on this front, the majority of fathers don't have access to these policies. So this lack of access to family-friendly supportive policies continues to persist. When I interviewed fathers a number of years ago, I discussed these policies. I wanted to know fathers' experience with these policies, perspectives on these policies. And in all the conversations I had, fathers either expressed frustration with the lack of workplace flexibility, or if they had workplace flexibility, they emphasized that this was a key reason why they could be an involved father. For example, amongst the fathers I interviewed, almost all of them took only 1 week off of work when their first child was born. And most of them had to use either vacation days or some sort of informal arrangement to even take that short period of time off. Aaron, quote from him, as you see here, he was the exception. He was entitled to 3 weeks of paternity leave, and he took the longest leave among any of the fathers I interviewed. But his first son was born premature, and his son spent a month in the NICU. So he had to return to work even before his son was home from the hospital. And he told me, I felt I needed to be at home helping my wife. Obviously, she went through a decent spell of depression post-birth when he came home. So my wife is left to ponder over all this, and I have to go to work. I also couldn't spend as much time with him, meaning his son. I would have liked to have been more involved post-birth for an extended period of time, for a longer period of time than what I was given. So even when fathers have access to policies that seem generous by US standards, they're often not sufficient in enabling fathers to be fully engaged dads. John also spoke to me about frustrations he had with lack of flexibility at work. He recounted one story about trying to integrate flexibility, saying, I figured out that some people were taking their lunch break late in the afternoon to pick their kids up from school, like a couple of women in my workplace. And I started doing the same thing, and it was very helpful for my family. My wife didn't have to pick the kids up from school and could spend more time in the office. The director of my work told me I couldn't do that because I need to be there during the afternoon in case I was needed. So John's story to me really illustrates the power of ideal worker norms for men. So in his workplace, it was more acceptable for women workers to use flexibility because they're also expected to have parenting obligations. Now, while this likely disadvantaged them within the workplace, we know that this is part of the reason why women experience a variety of disadvantages in paid labor. The same opportunities were not extended to John. So consequently, John's wife had to bear more of the parenting responsibilities, enabling gender inequality within his family to persist. In addition to lack of access to family supportive policies, fathers also discuss penalties they face when prioritizing family over work. Workers often face a flexibility stigma when they're perceived to be prioritizing family over work and violating ideal worker norms. Indeed, one survey from a couple of years ago showed that 74% of fathers are fearful of taking parental leave because they believe they will be penalized for doing so. This was exactly the situation for one of the fathers I interviewed. Jeremy recounted how he was fired for requesting the parental leave to which he was entitled. He worked for a place that actually had a paid parental leave policy. And he was told, I told my supervisor that my wife is pregnant and I looked up parental leave and need to start taking it April 1st. She basically responded with, oh, that's bad timing. Why did she get pregnant? And that was very upsetting to me because this was a planned pregnancy and we were very, very excited. And then she emails me later saying, we need to talk about the parental leave. She said, this is the type of job where you can't take leave, and so you're going to need to find another job. Results from survey experiments that I've conducted with one of my research teams provide further evidence of penalties associated with using work-family policies. So focusing on paid parental leaves specifically, we find that fathers who take longer leaves are perceived to be less committed to their job, less likely to be promoted or given a raise at work, more likely to have their work responsibilities reduced, and more likely to be fired compared to workers who take shorter leave or no leave at all. So even when fathers have access to policies that may enable them to be more engaged at home, they may not take full advantage of these policies, given the pressure to fulfill ideal worker expectations, as well as the fear of experiencing these kinds of penalties. So we know that work remains a key barrier that prevents fathers from being as engaged at home as they would like to be. And there's some evidence that the current landscape of available work-family policies in the US contribute to this to some extent, given that many fathers lack access to policies that may promote greater work-family balance. But what if access to workplace flexibility and paid family leave increased? Would this help to provide men with more time to devote to their families? Would better work-family policies also help to shift workplace cultures to be more accepting of men having involved family lives? These are the questions I'm going to turn to now. So first, some context. All right, so paid leave policies are one set of work-family policies that may help to promote greater father involvement and other benefits to society. First and foremost, paternity leave, or paid leave that fathers can utilize, may be one social policy that can help to increase opportunities for both men and women. As I've mentioned, society largely supports and rewards adherence to traditional gender roles that reward men. Family norms pressure women to be intensive mothers and men to be breadwinners, and employers reinforce these norms by penalizing mothers and providing a bonus to fathers. Employers are also more likely to offer paid leave and longer periods of paid leave to mothers as compared to fathers. Providing leave opportunities to men and encouraging men to take leave may help to change this structure. By having time off work, fathers gain greater awareness of domestic needs, learn how to be engaged parents, and share in domestic tasks. In addition, by having help at home, mothers may be less stressed and able to return to paid labor sooner. Moreover, by increasing the expectation that both parents will take time off to care for children, gender gaps in both paid and unpaid labor may be reduced. More comprehensive paid leave policies may also enable fathers to be more engaged parents and partners. Fathers increasingly stress the importance of being an engaged, caring parent, but the social pressures of breadwinning and employer expectations often prevent fathers from embracing this ideal. Policies that enable fathers to take time off to bond with their child increase the likelihood that fathers remain engaged parents throughout a child's life. And in doing so, children gain all the benefits associated with having an involved father, including having a role model that shares in domestic labor, further contributing to changes in gendered perceptions of parenting. A third potential benefit of more comprehensive paid leave policies is to help reduce the rising gap between the haves and have-nots. If paid leave provides benefits to families, and there's a whole host of reasons to believe that it does, currently only those families who have access to leave and the ability to take leave have access to these benefits. Not surprisingly, because access to leave is largely determined by employers in the US, more advantaged individuals are more likely to have access to leave and access to better leave packages than less advantaged individuals. Thus, current leave policies contribute to rising inequality, and it thus seems reasonable to expect that if we increase access to leave, we also may be contributing in some small way to reduced inequality. So overall then, there's reason to believe better paid leave policies may largely be beneficial to families and the broader society. So consistent with these benefits, numerous studies and polls show widespread support for paid leave. The vast majority of Americans across the board believe workers should receive paid leave. Now, there are disagreements about how paid leave should be funded, but there's clear support for paid leave itself. Yet, Americans do not necessarily think that all parents should receive equal amounts of leave. For example, I show here results from a recent study where we find that US adults believe that mothers should receive 16 weeks of paid parental leave, whereas fathers should only receive about 10 to 11 weeks. And these findings are consistent with other studies showing a gender disparity in the ideal number of weeks that parents should receive. So here we start to understand a bit about why there may be unique barriers to leave taking for fathers. The general belief is that although Americans support paid leave, they also think that fathers don't need as much leave, despite the evidence of numerous benefits when fathers take leave, which I'll get into more later. So in addition to believing that mothers should receive more leave than fathers, Americans also do not think that fathers should take as much leave as mothers. So fathers should get less leave and they should take less leave. Findings from a paper published earlier this year show that among parents with access to paid parental leave, US adults believe that partnered fathers should only take about 9 weeks of leave compared to mothers who should take close to 13 weeks. And in general, in terms of how workers are perceived when they take paid leave, fathers are viewed most favorably when they take 9 weeks of leave. Anything more than that, and they're started to be perceived as taking too much leave. Mothers instead are viewed most favorably when they take 13 weeks of leave. And as you can see here, I'm not going to focus too much on this now. I'm happy to answer questions in the Q&A, but we also look at different family structures here. And so parents with same-sex partners, particularly lesbian mothers, are viewed less favorably when taking paid leave. I also want to note here that I'm highlighting the negative and I'm highlighting the gender difference to sort of illustrate the barriers that fathers face. But in a more positive note, I do want to emphasize and reiterate that the findings here and on the previous slide actually suggest, although there's a gender difference, Americans are generally supportive of fathers' leave taking. Results show that US adults believe that fathers should receive sizable lengths of paid leave, right? Even though they think they should receive less than mothers, 10 or 11 weeks is still a good chunk of paid leave, certainly by US standards. And that they think fathers should be taking 9 weeks of paid leave. And so encouraging fathers to take 9 weeks of leave would be a vast improvement over what we currently have. So perceptions, although not as favorable as for mothers, are still largely favorable for fathers. So these findings suggest that simply having a paid leave policy doesn't mean that fathers are going to take full advantage of it or that there would only be positive consequences associated with paid leave. If Americans think that fathers do not need as much paid leave as mothers and that taking long leaves, such as the 12 weeks of paid leave allowed in states with paid family leave policies, would be viewed unfavorably, then fathers may be hesitant to take these leaves, even if there are policies that allow them to do so. So to overcome the stigmas associated with leave taking and the gendered variations in perceptions of leave taking, we will need to change workplace culture and broader ideal worker norms to enable more fathers to feel comfortable and accepted when taking paid leave. We find some evidence that well-designed paid leave policies can help to overcome these barriers by improving workplace cultures and mitigating some of the stigmas associated with leave. Specifically, perceived commitment of workers is higher within workplace contexts with more favorable leave policies. And the impact of this context is more pronounced for fathers than for mothers. You can see the gap between the green and the purple is much larger for fathers than for mothers. And so what makes a paid leave context favorable? So we find that favorable context exists when longer periods of leave are provided, workers receive higher pay while on leave, the workplace is supportive of workers taking leave, and there's a specific leave policy for fathers. And that's important because it signals to fathers that leave is for them and not just something that is reserved for mothers. So paid leave policies are vital in providing fathers with time to bond with their new child, develop co-parenting routines, and gain experience and awareness of childcare and domestic tasks. Facilitating the development of well-crafted policies that are supportive to fathers are key in reducing some of the negative perceptions associated with leave taking and will enable more fathers to take advantage of paid leave opportunities. Workplace flexibility is a second policy that can help reduce workplace barriers to father involvement. Being able to work from home provides fathers with more time to spend with their families. Working from home also exposes fathers to the broader range of domestic labor that occurs within households. Simply put, by being home more, fathers gain a better understanding and appreciation of all of the domestic labor that must be performed, including housework and cognitive labor, in addition to childcare. This may lead fathers to take on more of these tasks and be more equally engaged in domestic labor. Now, all of the fathers I interviewed expressed a desire for greater flexibility and longer parental leave. And a few of the fathers I spoke with actually prioritized these policies as they saw flexibility as essential for them to be a fully engaged dad. As an example, Eric talked to me about the frustrations he had about lack of workplace flexibility when his daughter was born. He was able to take a few days off when his daughter was born, but not nearly as much as he wanted to. His company was very rigid and expected employees to always be at work. He also told me that he thought he would be fired if he had requested additional unpaid time off when his daughter was born. Now, he prioritized family, and so shortly after his daughter was born, he left that job for an employer that was much more flexible and family friendly. And in speaking about his new employer, he said, "I work somewhere that is very family first. Yeah, they expect you to work 40 hours a week or more if you need to. But if something comes up at home, or like we had a dance recital this winter and I was part of that, I was one of the elves, so I had to go to practice every Friday night. Work was like, yeah, go, have fun. Whatever you need to do, go. Or if I've got to take my daughter to dance practice, that comes first. So I work for a company now that is very focused on make sure your family is good." Michael also talked about how his conscious choice to leave a demanding job for a more flexible one was key in enabling him to be a fully engaged dad. If you remember, Michael was the father who started his career as an architect, left this job prior to having, or about when he had kids, for a career in academia, which he believed would provide him with better work-family balance. He said, "I have a very flexible job, so I can do some of the things that maybe some dads wouldn't really be able to do. Like I can pitch in if I need to go pick up a kid that's sick from school, or, my wife needs to leave early from work or something, I can always take them to school. I never have to miss anything. I never have to miss concerts or activities or basketball games. I feel like we've done a lot of things in our life that made it such that I'm able to be really involved." I imagine that for some dads, even if they wanted to be involved, there's just structural things that would make it difficult for them to be able to do that. So the perceptions among fathers is that having more autonomy about where and when you work can provide the flexibility needed to be a more fully engaged dad. As such, expanding access to workplace flexibility can be another work-family policy that can increase father involvement. And we saw evidence of exactly this during the COVID-19 pandemic. This graph shows the proportion of US parents who divided housework and childcare in various ways. The various lines are whether the mother does most of it, whether the father does most of it, or whether both housework and childcare is shared equally. I draw your attention to the change in April 2020 when the pandemic first hit and we saw dramatic shifts toward more parents sharing this labor equally and fewer families where the mother did the majority of the housework and childcare. Now, what changed in April 2020? Well, as we know, everything changed in April 2020. As this was the start of the pandemic, everyone was in a panic, things were crazy, right? But more specifically, this was during the lockdown period when lots of fathers were home. Being at home gave fathers more time to perform domestic labor. It also exposed them to all of the childcare and housework needs within their household, right? It wasn't just fathers that were home, everybody was home. So most fathers say they want to be highly engaged and want to divide this labor equally, but either don't have the time or are unaware of how much work actually needs to be done at home. Lockdowns early on in the pandemic removed these barriers, and the effects on father involvement were dramatic. So we find this evidence among US parents, but you can see similar trends really across the world. We see evidence of similar shifts toward more equal sharing in Canada, the UK, Netherlands, Australia, and other countries. It's worth noting a couple of other things in these graphs. First, fathers who continued to be able to work from home were more likely to maintain an egalitarian arrangement even after lockdowns ended. And I'll show you more about that in a second. And although we saw reversion back towards mothers doing more of the domestic labor beginning in fall 2020, It is worth noting that there was slight progress toward a more equal division of housework and childcare post-pandemic. The exposure to domestic labor that fathers received by being home increased fathers' awareness of and experience performing domestic labor, which led to slight increases in fathers' shares of especially childcare post-pandemic. Obviously, in terms of a policy recommendation, promoting lockdowns would not be an advisable or sustainable work-family policy. But this natural experiment illustrated the potential ways in which workplace flexibility policies can be effective in promoting greater father involvement and more egalitarian domestic labor arrangements. So these two graphs may look similar to the ones I showed you on the previous slide. But what's different about these graphs is that these graphs illustrate the longitudinal patterns that specific families experienced in regard to how they divided housework and childcare and how they experienced individual change in these patterns from before the pandemic until after it officially ended in 2023. The previous slide was just sort of averages across all parents. So in these graphs, what you see here is if you look at the graph on the left, about 11% of families, the light blue line, had a very traditional division of housework prior to the pandemic, but over time became more egalitarian and were more likely to have a non-traditional division by 2023, where either housework was shared equally or fathers did more of it. And I show these trajectories because fathers' frequency of remote work was one of the strongest predictors of whether a family either maintained a non-traditional division of housework and childcare or followed the blue line and experienced a non-traditional, became more non-traditional throughout the pandemic. So even after lockdowns ended, the ability to work remotely at least sometimes, so either a fully remote job or a hybrid remote job, continues to be vital in providing fathers with the opportunity to take on greater shares of housework and childcare. So the previous two slides begin to provide some evidence of the impact that supportive work-family policies have on families. And this has been a question that has been sort of at the heart of a lot of the research I and my collaborators have done, with a particular focus on fathers' use of paternity leave and flexible workplace policies. So I want to spend just some time walking through what we've learned about the benefits of these policies. Looking first at father involvement, we find that fathers who take longer periods of leave are more engaged in their children's lives. And these higher levels of engagement persist throughout the first few years of childhood. Here I show predicted probabilities that fathers will be frequently engaged in activities with their child at least multiple times per week. And results show that longer periods of leave are significantly increase the likelihood that fathers are highly engaged in their child's life, both in the year following the child's birth as well as 4 years later. But if you'll note, the predicted probabilities peak at 0.4 or so. So it's important to note that regardless of leave taking, most fathers are not highly engaged. So taking leave helps, but the short period of leave offered to American fathers is often not sufficient in overcoming the other barriers that make it challenging for fathers to be highly engaged parents. We know that father involvement has a whole host of benefits for children. And so the question I had was whether the increased long-term engagement resulting from leave taking at birth helped fathers to develop stronger attachments to children, closer bonds, and ultimately stronger father-child relationships. So one data set that included interviews with children allowed us to examine whether fathers' leave taking was associated with children's perceptions of their relationships with their fathers when they were about 9 years old. Shown here is the association between leave taking and father-child communication. Results show that children whose fathers took longer periods of leave have a higher probability of reporting that their father often talks over decisions with them compared to children whose fathers took shorter periods of leave or no leave at all. Results also show that children whose fathers took longer periods of leave feel more comfortable sharing ideas that really matter with their father than children whose fathers took shorter periods of leave or no leave at all. So taken together, results show that taking longer leaves increases the likelihood that fathers will have clear, open communication with their children when their children get older. Similarly, we find that children report having a closer relationship to their father if their father took longer leave. Specifically, children are about 10% more likely to report feeling extremely close to their father when fathers took 2 or more weeks of leave compared to when fathers don't take any leave at all when their child is born. In a recent paper published just a few weeks ago, using our newest national data from parents, we find that taking paternity leave is also positively associated with fathers' shares of and time spent in housework. Looking first at the graph on the left, you can see fathers who took longer leaves performed greater shares of housework. Now, differences aren't huge, but any shift in housework is notable. So as a comparison here, fathers who take more than a month of leave perform about 7% greater shares of housework than fathers who do not take leave. Fathers who take paternity leave also spend more time each week on housework tasks, as shown on the right. Now, we don't find much difference by length of leave. The real difference was whether fathers took any leave versus no leave at all. And we find that fathers who took leave spend about an hour more on weekly housework tasks compared to fathers who did not take leave. In addition to enabling fathers to be more engaged at home, leave may also enable fathers to be more engaged co-parents and partners. Doing so may help to reduce the burdens typically placed on mothers and help to facilitate a more egalitarian division of labor within households. Similar to the previous results, I find significant but modest evidence that fathers' leave taking is associated with increased parenting support, and that these higher levels of co-parenting support persist for years following a child's birth. Yet, similar to results for father engagement, overall percentage of fathers who provide high levels of co-parenting support is relatively low. But even though these effects are modest, we find considerable evidence that fathers' leave taking strengthens parental relationships. So the graph on the left looks at an overall assessment of parents' relationships where 5 means mothers view their relationship with fathers as excellent, 4 is very good, and 3 is good. And as you can see, when fathers take longer leaves, mothers consistently report better relationships, and these effects persist for years following the birth of a child. The graph on the right shows a similar trend, but the outcome is the probability that mothers report being very happy in their relationship with fathers. Again, parents are happier in their relationships when fathers take longer leaves. Specifically, mothers have about a 7% higher probability of being very happy in their relationship when fathers take long parental leave compared to when fathers do not take any leave. So fathers' leave taking leads fathers to be more engaged parents and helps to strengthen parental relationships. It seems reasonable to think that fathers' leave taking may also help to stabilize parental relationships as well. Shown here is a cumulative percentage of couples that ended their relationship over the first few years following a birth in one nationally representative data set. Among families where fathers did not take leave, 40% of couples ended their relationship within 6 years of having a child. In contrast, among families where fathers took 2 or more weeks of leave, only 23% ended their relationship. Thus, what this demonstrates is that increased access to leave for fathers may also help to promote family stability. And I'm not going to show these results, but we further validated this finding using a national sample of socioeconomically disadvantaged families, and we found very similar results, suggesting that fathers' leave taking promotes relationship stability even among those families that are most likely to experience relationship dissolution. Shifting gears a little bit here, but I noted some of the stigmas and some of the negative perceptions about leave taking for fathers. We do also find some evidence of ways in which fathers are viewed more favorably when they take leave. So again, using survey experiments, we find that among parents in a workplace context that provides paid leave, fathers who take longer periods of leave up to 11 weeks are viewed as better parents than fathers that take shorter periods of leave. And we find a similar pattern when looking at perceptions of warmth among fathers. This suggests that enacting better paid leave policies and encouraging fathers to take leave may help to change gendered parenting perceptions and lead more people to view fathers as engaged, competent parents. Similarly, we find that fathers who take longer periods of leave, up to 10 weeks, are viewed as more likable at work than fathers who take shorter periods of leave. And we've also done a bit of work to examine the impact of working from home on fathers' involvement in domestic labor. These are pre-pandemic findings from the American Time Use Survey. But what we find is that at the extremes, fathers who work exclusively from home spend about 13 more minutes in childcare per day than fathers who never work from home. Again, this doesn't sound like a dramatic number, 13 minutes, right? But that adds up to an hour and a half more childcare by fathers per week, which would actually go a long way in reducing burdens on mothers. And here's an illustration of a similar trend using our pandemic data. In each year of the pandemic, there was a lower likelihood of having a traditional division of childcare where mothers performed most of these tasks when fathers worked from home at least sometimes. Stated differently, parents are much more likely to have an egalitarian or non-traditional division of childcare when fathers work from home at least sometimes. And finally, just thinking about the potential benefits of father involvement for families and for gender equality more broadly, it's important to consider how father involvement may impact mothers' paid labor force participation. Again, the expectation is that if fathers are highly involved at home, burdens on mothers would be reduced and they have more opportunities in paid labor. Here I show the illustration of the impact of this just from early on in the pandemic. So we looked at the association between father shares of childcare prior to the pandemic and changes in mothers' employment early in the pandemic. And results are striking. So in families where mothers did all of the childcare prior to the pandemic, mothers had approximately a 50% chance of reducing their labor force participation during lockdowns. In contrast, among families where parents equally shared this childcare, mothers had only a 15% likelihood of reducing their paid labor force participation. Quite simply, enabling and encouraging fathers to perform more domestic labor can have dramatic impacts on mothers' labor force attachment. So to summarize, increasing father involvement at home is key in promoting gender equality for a whole variety of reasons that I've said multiple times, so I'm not going to repeat again now. But currently, the institution of work continues to be one of the primary barriers that prevent fathers from becoming more engaged parents and co-parents. Designing and expanding supportive work-family policies, such as paid parental leave and workplace flexibility, can help to change the culture surrounding work, enable more fathers to increase their involvement at home, and ultimately increase opportunities for mothers as well. Most of my research, and obviously the focus of this talk, is focused on the need for and benefits of good work-family policies for fathers. I do want to note this is not to ignore the need for mothers to have access to these policies as well. That's obviously extremely important. But given the persistence of gendered attitudes where women are expected to prioritize family, it's important to recognize that if we work toward a culture whereby fathers have access to these policies and are expected to use them, that will go a long way in shifting gendered expectations of both men and women in workplaces. Of course, work-family policies alone are not the sole solution to persistent gender inequality or to promoting greater father involvement. As shown earlier, although fathers who take advantage of these policies are more involved at home than fathers who don't work from home or don't take paternity leave, we still have a lot of room to grow in terms of promoting greater father involvement. And so really to maximize the potential benefits of these policies, we need to work toward changing workplace cultures, not only to increase access to supportive policies, but to fully accept workers and encourage them when they use these policies. Parents are fearful that use of these policies will hurt their careers. They may not use them. Instead, recognizing that workers have lives outside of work and demonstrating support for those lives may actually benefit everybody. By feeling valued and supported in their workplace, parents are more likely to be committed to their employer. And by having the opportunity to be more engaged in their family life, fathers may have improved well-being. In the end, providing greater structural support to promote father involvement will ultimately benefit everyone. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Richard. That is fabulous.